For centuries, humans have been growing alongside our botanical brethren. Our histories have mixed and mingled to bring us modern medical marvels, faded folklore, and everything in between. Of course, in order to understand the plant, we have to start with its roots. I'm M. Grebner-Gaddis, and this is Rooted.
Hello, and welcome back to another week of Rooted. This week we're doing something a little bit different. We are actually going to be doing an episode where I haven't done any research, so you guys will just be kind of along for the ride with me, I guess. It's definitely an interesting concept, something Kat, our editor, actually suggested, so I thought it would be fun to start off this kind of mini-series, I guess, with a fictional plant. That way I'm not spreading any kind of accidental misinformation, since a lot of my research for this show does take quite a long time, and there can be a lot of misinformation on the internet, especially when it comes to the origins of plants or safe ways to use them. So to avoid inadvertently recommending someone poison themselves, we're going to stick to fake plants for now, and then as we get more comfortable in this process, if it goes well, maybe we can look into doing real plants. But for this week, I'm coming to you with a fictional plant that I think you'll really enjoy. So the fictional plant we're discussing today, I've heard of in a few different places. Most notably, it's a big part of the kind of early games in Silent Hill, which is what I'm most familiar with. But it also comes up a lot in other kind of things related to that. It's very like Lovecraftian. It pops up in a lot of H.P. Lovecraft stories. And it really can be found kind of all over in the realm of magic. But it's nothing that is like super nailed down. I do believe that H.P. Lovecraft actually kind of invented this plant himself, but we'll find that out together today, I guess. The plant in question is Aglaophotis. Pulling up my first little... We're going to start at Wikipedia, I guess. I understand like the whole like Wikipedia is not a source, but as a starting point for something like this, I'm going to say it's fine. So we're going to go with it. It says this is an herb mentioned occasionally in works on occultism. It also is called Olaribos, and again, it's mentioned in a lot of H.P. Lovecraft books. A Greek doctor, it says, who the plant is named for, said that it was actually a member of the peony family. And it looks like a lot of people are low-key thinking originally in history that this was like an early European peony, but there's really not a lot of evidence for what this plant is. So it's been proven to have like popped up in a few places, it sounds like, but none of us truly know what it is. We've just been guessing if it's even real. But according to this Greek doctor, it was used for warding off demons, witchcraft, and a fever, which is super interesting because I think a lot of people just associated all ailments at the time with demons. Like cavities were demons, fevers are demons, stomach aches, demons, like you name it, there's a demon. And it's always like your fault too, like you've done something to deserve the demon. Kind of messed up. Okay, just continuing to read. Oh, interesting, we've got controversy. Apparently, this is like directly not how H.P. Lovecraft said it would be used. H.P. Lovecraft actually was like, yo, if you want to summon the demons, like if you want to befriend them, you need to be gifting them flowers. And like, honestly, I feel like we don't really talk about that enough in pop culture. Like, should we be trying to banish all the spirits in our homes? Or like, should we be trying harder to make friends? I'm not saying befriend like demonic entities that wish you harm, but I am saying, like, sometimes maybe Zach Baggins goes in too hard. Like, maybe instead of calling them mean names, we should be presenting them with flowers. I know H.P. Lovecraft wasn't onto a lot. Like, he's kind of awful. But I do kind of feel like maybe he's onto something in this instance specifically. Okay. And now we're just kind of talking about it in pop culture in this article. Like I mentioned, it's part of Silent Hill. It's like a fluid or like a little pill. And like if you get a parasite, you take it and then it's supposed to like cleanse your body. So we're really leaning into like the Greek doctor side when it comes specifically to Silent Hill, and that is how I'm most familiar with this plant. Although I've also seen sources claiming that it's a grass, and I've seen some light discourse about it being two separate plants instead of the same one. But I'm seeing here that it's one. So we'll see if anyone else chimes in on that. Looks like it was also in one of the Final Fantasy games as a plant monster, so that's kind of fun. Curious to learn a little bit more about that. But let's move on to our next source, because that's really all this Wikipedia has for us. The next one we'll go to... Maybe we'll start with Encyclopedia, and then we can move into... I'm seeing some articles that looks like it's kind of getting into this discourse. It's called danharms.wordpress.com, and it says, we get Necronomicon. No, I don't know how you say that, you guys. We get Necronomicon? People who are H.P. Lovecraft fans are, like, shrieking at me right now. I just know it. I'm sorry. But we're going to start with this encyclopedia article. Again, this is not, like, scientific. Typically, when I'm doing the show, I'm deep diving into, like, medical journals, but then we're also visiting, like, occult sites, witchcraft-centered sites, herbalism sites. I try to read a lot of scholarly articles. And if we're specifically talking about the indigenous roots of a plant, often I'm digging into, like, what I can find from people of that culture to learn more about them that way. So I really do try to pull from a wide variety of sources and experiences, but for this not real plant, as you might imagine, there are not a ton of sources. And this is also, like, not a super popular fictional plant from what I could find, which is why I think it's interesting. I think, in my research of the show at least, a lot of times it's these kind of, like, sleeper hit plants where there's not a ton of people who are talking about them, but the people who are into it are, like, super into it. Much like my Donnie Darko phase of college. No one else at college was, like, super into it, but, like, me and my friends were there, like, every week deep diving on it. And that's, like, kind of the nerd science that I'm here for in my heart. Okay, so this encyclopedia.com article, again, like, super scientific. Absolutely do not click a single freaking link on this page. It's will give you a virus. The whole article just says it's a kind of herb that's grown in the deserts of Arabia, and it's used by sorcerers for evoking demons, but it was apparently only to evoke demons, according to this article. And then other plants are then used to, like, keep the evil spirits around. So this plant brings the boys to the yard, but it does not keep them in the yard. They're, like, then distracted by a shiny rock across the street. So you need to, like, have another plant to kind of lure them back in, according to encyclopedia.com. Is it Necronomicon? That sounds cooler than everything else I said. So we're going to lean into that if I can remember it. Maybe we deep dive into that history for a second. Okay, short text written by H.P. Lovecraft in the 1920s. It's an occult grimoire. He used it to build out Cthulhu, so that's, like, kind of fun. And apparently the Necronomicon inspired Robert Chambers' The King in Yellow. And apparently that book indicates that, like, whoever reads this would, like, go crazy. And this text... Okay, from what I'm reading, for everyone who knows what this is, I'm so sorry that you're subjected to this. But I do not, so... If you also don't know, you can learn with me. Okay, it says that this was written by someone who died because he was devoured by invisible demons in front of, like, a bunch of people. So that's kind of messed up. And it says that he was, like, mad when he wrote it. And it's believed that maybe he, like, went crazy, because of the demons, but maybe, like, in writing this, then you would go mad because you're learning these facts you're not supposed to know about demons you're not supposed to be able to see, even though they can apparently eat you. And then apparently there was, like, a big government cover-up where then they were like, absolutely no one read this because it's going to fuck you up. But of course, one thing humans are really great at is being like, hey, we like that thing, don't destroy it, and then secretly having a copy somewhere. So that's, Lovecraft posits that that's why we have these private copies, and that they're not telling you this, but like all the high education, like really fancy pants people in the world, each university across the globe that is considered a part of this quote unquote brotherhood, like has a copy of this, but you're not allowed to read it. And then private copies exist, and that's how we know this exists, according to Lovecraft. Again, this is all fake, though. Okay, and interestingly, he wrote this, but he didn't necessarily, like, plan to release it. It was actually published after his death, and there were only 80 copies of the original that were printed because people didn't think people were going to be that into it. So if anyone has an original copy, that's like quite a flex. And then a new person bought the rights and they basically just published this by itself. Okay, and then they're just getting into more on the book, kind of pointing out that I guess Lovecraft used this to build out his body of work. And while it was very much a real book to him, at the time he was publishing his works, this book didn't exist in the real world, but he referenced it like it was real. And to him, it was real because he was literally writing it for these books. And he was often using like real scientific sources along the fake things that he was writing to try to give it more kind of context and value and make it feel a little bit more grounded and real. So that's kind of fun. So there are like loosely realistic details in this actual book. Okay, and then not shocking at all, this book, should you choose to read it, has been criticized for depicting Middle Eastern cultures and histories in a really harmful way, especially when taken out of context the things that Lovecraft himself wrote about this culture outside of the science that he was using. So essentially, he was pulling stories and then using those true facts to illustrate a fictitious reality he was building out that is harmful to Middle Eastern culture and histories. This is, of course, not news really to anyone. Lovecraft, unfortunately, does have a history of kind of doing this to different cultures, so that's really not surprising. It is unfortunate. But if you should choose to read it, just note that this has been called out as being xenophobic. And that's really all that this source has to say about this book. Probably not something I'm super interested in reading at this moment. Moving on to our next source, which will hopefully talk more about our plant. Let's start with this Alchemy Works article titled Reed Canary Grass. If I'm not mistaken, this is likely going to be taking us down the path of like what possible plants they could be. So we've read that Wikipedia article which posited that it could have potentially been some kind of early peony that kind of inspired all of this. And that was actually being said well before Lovecraft had written anything about this. So let's get into like some of the supposed plants that these stories and kind of cultural moments could be referring to. One thing that's been a little bit frustrating as I've been Googling is I'm not finding any of these like historical sources of these. I know they exist because people are specifically mentioning them. But it's interesting to see kind of all these specifics of people trying to guess what it could possibly be that they would have potentially been referring to, even though in the same breath people are also being like, I know this is a fake plant. So we're all just as lost as I am now. It's not a real plant, but let's find out what it could be like. Okay, this article is specifically saying that it could be like nettles, juniper, or fennel, but the person writing this is saying that's absolutely not true, and it has to be some kind of weed, like reed grass, because it apparently needs to grow in wetlands, which is interesting. They're saying it has to be this because reed grass gets over 6 feet tall and forms into clumps, which is interesting because I know we haven't really talked about this yet, but the plant we're talking about today specifically is said to be like, it's said to look kind of like a peony according to that Greek doctor. So this is like a very big change. And again, I haven't read H.P. Lovecraft's book, so I don't know what he's describing it as, but they're saying this has to be it because it's the only thing that makes sense is literally what they're arguing. They're saying like you have to cover the seeds to make it grow correctly. This is interesting. We're getting into like growth habits, but then we also have a random jab being thrown in like an I know who Lovecraft is, and I know that it's fake, but I'm just saying. Yeah, that's pretty much it for this article. He's just going through and disproving, like, it can't be nettles or marijuana because they don't really grow in swampy areas, and they're not, most importantly, they're not grasses. Same with juniper and fennel. Fennel does grow pretty wildly around, like, creeks and wet areas. It's related to dill. It's part of the Umbelliferae family. Just like wild carrot and caraway and all of those things we've talked about. Juniper grows where I am. It, again, does not prefer wet anything. It really likes things to really dry out. This person is saying, without a doubt, it's reed grass, which is really interesting because the next article that we're about to get into is literally calling this person out and saying, you're wrong, and it's not reed grass. So get ready. Wow. Okay. This immediately starts with a call out, which, like, as a person who does regularly read forums like this for the show, I'm kind of accustomed to this, but as a person who's somehow now very aware of this culture, this is like a big call out moment. This is someone being like, and you're wrong. Which is like a little surprising to see out the gate. Like, this is getting serious, you guys. I have unlocked drama. I have found contention in the fictional plant universe that I was not expecting to find. So basically, this person is positing like he's wrong. And this is a quote. Oddly enough, his quotation regarding the herb is contradicted by the very source he uses. See the upper right of the page he quotes. Wow. Someone is upset. And they're saying it can't possibly be that because according to that page, which dates back to the 13th century, it can't be that. But we're not getting to like what he means by that. Okay, that's actually not as helpful as I was hoping. I was really hoping we were going to get into like the plant fiend discord of it all. And instead, we were just told that it couldn't possibly be reed grass because this book was written in the 13th century. Let's look up reed grass, shall we? Let's just see. Like, maybe reed grass just hadn't evolved in the 13th century. That feels very unlikely given what I know about grasses, but let's find out. Common reed is a persistent grass, temperate tropical regions. What is the history of reed canary grass? Here we go. Reed canary grass is believed to be native to Europe. However, some authors believe it to be native to Asia and North America as well. Present-day range extends throughout... Okay, this is not actually helpful. Purdue, please elaborate. Sod-forming perennial grass. So sod-forming, when people say that, if you're ever reading a description of grass and it's describing sod forming, it's important to remember there's a few different kinds of grass. Sod forming essentially means that it grows in a giant sheet of grass, so everything is kind of interconnected. The way that when you buy sod, it's just a big roll. That's sod forming. There are other grasses like pampas grass that just simply grow in clumps. It's interesting because in the last article we read about reed canary grass, the author was positing that it had to be reed grass because it grows in clumps, but it doesn't. It is not clump forming, it is sod forming with creeping rhizomes. It is correct that they get between 2 to 6 feet tall, and they are fairly invasive, so the problem is that any kind of sod forming thing that forms where it's not supposed to be oftentimes will crowd out everything else that is supposed to live there and forms like a big kind of monotype of plant, which is not useful for biodiversity, especially if it's displacing native plants that are more helpful to the animals that live there. And while it does help to prevent erosion, it does stop soil from moving around and silt, and it can block waterways. So it's not super helpful. And if you're allergic to grasses, this is apparently like a big yikes for you. So it's really not suggested to buy this or celebrate it. So yeah, if you were like secretly hoping to have some kind of really big botanical nerdy deep cut in your yard, Purdue University is saying reed canary grass is not your gal. Now they're talking about control, but we don't care about that. Sorry, I forgot. We're on a mission. We're on a mission to find out when reed canary grass evolved. When did reed grasses evolve? I wish you guys were here so I could ask you how I should be Googling this, because usually I just kind of find it. Okay. Oh, we found it. Okay. So they're all part of the Poaceae family, which would have formed during the Cretaceous period, 145 to 66 million years ago. Okay. So I don't really understand the argument that it couldn't be that, because the book was written in the 13th century, even though we're suspending our disbelief since we know that it was written in 1927. Last time I checked, the 1300s, though a super long time ago, were not 66 million years ago, so I don't see how that makes it not canary grass. So we're kind of torn between canary grass or peonies, but I don't know which it would be. Aglaophotis. Okay, let's check the Monster of Monster blogs. That sounds promising, right? I hope. Sorry, the Monster blog of monsters. Okay, well, they're giving me something that is way more interesting than canary grass, I've got to tell you. This illustration, should you choose to click it, is like a really fucked up looking lily, and it has like a lot going on. Like one of these lilies, the center is made of what kind of looks like nectar bits, but also tongues. The other one is dripping something. I don't know what it's dripping, but it's kind of foreboding. One kind of looks like a calla lily, and then one has these really scary tentacle eyeball looking things, and it's all coming out of a very orchid-like bulbous stem, and its roots are just kind of like littered about the ground. Oh. Okay, this is a curious magical plant with a myriad of uses in healing, most particularly in treating salamander sickness. Okay. What is that? We're going to look up that in a second. But it says that it's a distant cousin to the peony, according to this source, and it's all over Europe, and it glows golden when it's ready to be harvested. I kind of wish all plants were like that. Sometimes I feel like, especially with peas, I'm just giving it my best shot, and half the time I'm wrong, or a worm has eaten it. It would be really helpful if it would just, like, get a little sparkly for me. Okay, and here we're again leaning into the whole, like, helpful at banishing demons, use it for a fever kind of situation. Also, according to this article, if you get someone to eat it, their spell is like a little bit weaker. So if you're trying to do magic, this is like, don't eat a bunch of this. And so I guess it's positing that people used to use it if someone was like too powerful of a witch and they had a lot of like trauma that made it hard for them to control their magic, they might be given a little bit of Aglaophotis to kind of help them control their powers until they could figure it out. So that's kind of good. We love that for her. Okay, they're describing the roots as worm-like. Love that. And it has like a pale yellow bloom, yellowish veins that also glow, and it grows in boggy soils. Okay, well, I like this definition better. If you guys ask me, this is the real one. I mean, they're all fake, but this is the one I want. Should we find out what salamander sickness is? I'm sorry, you guys have to come along with me for salamander sickness. I make the rules here, and I want to know what it is. Okay, hold on. There's like a whole new world of illnesses being opened to me. I understand that they're probably not real, but we're learning about them. So, salamander sickness, which is not to be confused with the fatal salamander scale sickness, meningitis. Wow. This is kind of intense, you guys. Okay. So essentially, this article is now saying that salamander sickness is just like a magical form of meningitis, but not like the fun kind of magic. This is like really bad magic that makes you really sick. And you have really bad fevers, and you have to make really strong icky potions that are cooling. So you have to go on like full-on quests to find ice moths, ice roses, and white lyre worms. And even if you do that, you might still die. So that's why hospitals have cooling charmed walls. I love the implication that like hospitals are cold because if they're not, people who secretly have salamander sickness could die. That's kind of a fun way to look at it. Next time I'm in the hospital and I'm complaining about how cold I am, I'm going to remind myself that there are people with salamander sickness. And it could be worse. But apparently it only takes like 5 days to heal from salamander sickness. Ew. But then you get slimy? And that's why it's called salamander sickness. So it's not called salamander sickness because you can get it from salamanders. Like, salamanders are not carrying magical meningitis. It is just that you are like icky and slimy when it's over. That's kind of gross and fun. Okay. Ew. You guys, they picked really icky pictures for this being made up. That feels really rude. Okay. Salamander scale sickness is caused by being bitten by salamanders, but only the ones in the Amazon. And it just causes a slow, painful death. And you just grow thick scales on your skin. And they're itchy. And then a golden pus seeps out that burns you alive. Who wrote this? Okay, well, there is Flex Dreams is who wrote it, but we have to give them a little bit of a thank you. They do caption this. I hate that I have to include this, but please do not delete the image source or my caption. Oh, okay, that's actually not helpful. They're actually not sorry for what they did to me. I take it back. Ew. Okay, well, they just said basically it gives you really bad sores that then burn you alive when they open, and then they didn't actually apologize to us. That's kind of messed up, but I'm kind of glad that none of this is real. Going back to salamander sickness, how did we get here? Oh, because the plant we're talking about today can treat salamander sickness, but not salamander scale sickness, so there you go. But the implication of that is that Aglaophotis has cooling properties, so that's interesting. We've learned something about that. Now, keeping into that tune of like breaking your fever, helping you stay cool, removing demons, let's get into Silent Hill, and then I promise to release you. Okay. We went to Silent Hill Wiki. I've never really been here, so I'm kind of scared, but I think it will be okay. Ooh. Okay. Heather's Pendant has it, but Heather's Pendant specifically is giving, if you guys remember in the early 2000s, at the mall sometimes they would have random oysters that you could like break open, and then there would be tiny pearls inside, and you would get this weird cage necklace, and then you could wear it. It specifically looks like one of those. And it is said to be a red liquid obtained from the plant, like it's sap, and it dispels demonic forces and grants supernatural protection against those forces. It's first mentioned just in Silent Hill, but it also plays a role in Silent Hill 3. Said to resemble blood. Interesting that they're mixing lore here. So they're saying like it's a red plant that dispels evil spirits, but they're borrowing that bit from Lovecraft that says that it grows in the Arabian deserts. Then they say that it could be vaporized or applied to the skin directly to guard against demons, but it's rare and hard to find. A book and play novel, Silent Hill, suggests that it's also made using White Claudia, which at some point we'll talk more about White Claudia on the show. But White Claudia is another made-up plant that exists, from what I know, only in Silent Hill. So we will talk about that. Okay, and this is just lore about it. So essentially one of the doctors in Silent Hill comes across like 2 vials of this, and he's very secretive about where he got them or why he has them. And then as the main character Harry comes to town looking for Cheryl, his daughter, he finds one of the broken bottles and takes it. And then he uses that to save Sybil, who's a different character, when he finds her possessed by a parasite on the merry-go-round. That's like a really gross scene if you have seen it. And then it kind of like expels the demons, and he's like, oh, that's cool. That is helpful. And then he discovers, that this thing kind of dispels monsters. And then he finds the doctor and saves him. Alrighty, now we're getting into the historical uses, as Silent Hill is saying. So, as we talked about, people speculate that it could have been real, with people saying, like, it's definitely a peony. I don't know that peonies were regularly used to draw demons out of people. I would have to research that, and we will in a minute. But that's what they're saying. They're saying this is probably the peony. That's, if you are trying to stay Silent Hill canon, they're saying it's a peony. They're saying peonies were used in Chinese medicine as antifungal and to treat wounds, pain, fever, and spasms, which, again, spasms were also pointed to in many cultures as a sign of demonic possession. Like, it couldn't just be that you were a little twitchy, like, it had to be demons. So, people would often give it to them for that. They're saying it was also used as a preventative measure against nightmares and for treating female infertility because it stimulates uterine muscles, but also that it was used to ward incubuses off. So that's interesting. Alrighty. Let me do a quick deep dive on peonies. We're not going to do like a full peony thing because we'll do a real episode on peonies at some point, I promise. But in the interest of clearing up whether or not that is supported by science, let's do a quick peer-reviewed study on peonies in healthcare. And just kind of see what we find. Okay. I'm not finding any super credible studies in this moment pointing to any of that has been peer-reviewed. That's not to say it doesn't exist. It's just that it's not coming up on PubMed that I'm seeing. Not that PubMed is the end-all be-all. I am seeing it on a lot of herbalism sites, but these aren't sites that I tend to go to. These are sites that tend to be like intentionally trying to sell things, which I stay away from when looking into herbalism things, just because I tend to find them to be a little bit less upfront about the facts. So I'm going to go out and say, like, if you have a fever, don't use peony root for now, unless it's something you've been doing for a long time and you've experienced your own success and results with it. But don't make any lifestyle changes, as always, unless you consult with a doctor. And we will do an episode on peonies soon. Maybe we can make that our next episode. Typically, researching for Rooted does take me about 8 to 10 hours each week because I really want to deep dive on a ton of different sources that I often don't really share with you guys just because sometimes it's kind of dense reading or not super interesting. But I hope you had fun kind of watching me Google, I suppose, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.
Until next time, be kind to yourselves, be kind to the earth, and just like a plant, drink your water. If you liked the show, please subscribe and consider leaving us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram at rooted.pod. We're finally updating regularly on YouTube at rooted.podcast, and you can check out our website, rootedpod.com, for transcripts, updates, merch, and so much more. The show is written, produced, and hosted by me. I'm Grebner Gaddis, edited by Kat Fren of Fren Diagram, and our theme music was written and produced by Eric Cluxon. Rooted is a Henbane Media LLC production.